The Things We All Carry is a podcast about first responders and their stories surrounding trauma on the job. The intention of this podcast is to raise awareness and share meaningful conversation around a subject often viewed as taboo or simply ignored. Be aware this content may be graphic and it is real. It may not be suitable for children or adults triggered by this subject matter.
Welcome to another episode of The Things We All Carry. A few weeks ago, maybe more by now, I stumbled across an indie film project with a very familiar title. The film, which was out of the Pacific Northwest, had such a similar title to my podcast, I had to check it out. My first thought was actually kind of a selfish one. I thought to myself, well, shit, someone else is doing what I'm doing. That thought quickly faded as I looked deeper into the film and the story behind it. Today, I get to introduce my audience to Cody Shea and his brilliant work of art, which is entitled The Call We Carry. Cody is a firefighter in the state of Washington and an independent filmmaker. Not just any filmmaker now, but an award-winning filmmaker, as he recently won the 2022 Best First-Time Filmmaker Award from the California Indies Film Festival. Cody set out to make a 5-minute promo for his department's peer support group, and what followed became a full-feature documentary on trauma, PTSD, and recovery. His movie does to PTSD and recovery what my podcast is attempting to do: highlight our struggles, inform you that you aren't alone, and show a path to recovery. That these two projects grew separately and organically on their own with an entire country between us is still amazing to me. The similarity in our approach is astonishing, and it's heartwarming to know that there are others out there shining a spotlight on this issue and trying to spread the word nationally and even internationally. We as a fire service specifically, and humans in general, can only benefit by the use of multiple voices preaching the same message. A quick reminder to please help us build a community which not only recognizes but supports each other through the struggles and recovery. Reach out through Instagram at The Things We All Carry or email mystory@thethingsweallcarry.com to offer support and to share your story. Please remember to leave a review on iTunes and give a shout out to any first responder you know, love, or care about. Y'all enjoy the show. Cody Shea, thanks for coming on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I got to tell you, and we just talked briefly, I watched your movie and I've been blown away by it. The stories in there, the content, it all rings so similar to what I'm trying to do on this show. And it just blows me away that there's somebody out there on the West Coast and there's somebody out here on the East Coast, and we got the same thought in mind. And so I appreciated it very much. I wanted to talk to you about it and drive my audience to your movie.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, it's funny. It's a small world. Like I said, I wish we met sooner. And we definitely have the same message that we're trying to get across. Real pleasure to be on today.
Yeah, not only the same message, but the ironic thing is we almost had the same exact title. Here I am on a show called The Things We All Carry, and you're making a movie called The Call We Carry. And it's just so ironic and it's so similar, eerily similar when you watch the movie.
Yeah. It was, no, that was pretty ironic when I found your podcast and realized, oh, wow, what is this? And then the names were similar. And then I listened to your podcast and I was like, dude, this guy gets it.
Yeah. And I'm happy that organically it came about that we both started doing something very similar, because that means that there are more people thinking about this, and it bodes well for the future, I hope.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, it is funny because I never heard of your show, and then I heard it.
So why don't you give us a little bit of your background? Where are you from? I know that we're going to speak in some generalities, but what's your history? What's your family history? What was growing up like, and how do you end up where you are today?
I'm 34. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington area, and I've been in the fire service for 5 years. I was raised in a firefighting household. Both my folks were firefighters with Seattle, all retired now, and stepdad as well, part of Seattle Fire. So I was pretty much raised within that culture and had a lot of exposure to it at a really young age. It's pretty much all I ever knew. Is folks work 24-hour shifts. And I'd go to grandma's house. They'd get off, take me home, and that was my life growing up. So I had a lot of familiarity with the fire service young, and a lot of exposure to it. And let's see, got out of high school and started working full time. And there was always that niche in the back of my mind of I really do want to be a firefighter, but I was more in the rebellious stage and my life took me in a different direction. And I fought it tooth and nail going into my 20s and gave up on pursuing it and started a longboard skateboard company. And that turned into a full-time gig up until about 25 years old. And then, my mom talked to me one day and said, "Hey, you can do all this stuff that you're doing and you can still be a firefighter." And at that point, the money was washing up and I didn't really see any longevity in my current plan. So I decided to start testing. Went after trying to get hired with Seattle and I got hired just south of there and turned out to be the best thing that ever could have happened to me, getting hired outside of Seattle. Especially today, because I wouldn't be hired in Seattle. I would have been fired if I went to Seattle because I had the vaccine mandate going on down here.
Oh, yep, definitely. Yep, that went on quite a number of spots across the country. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a nice affirmation that I'd made the right decision. I'm where I'm supposed to be. And then got through probation and started joining some committees. And I always had a passion for photography and videography from when I ran the skateboard company. Did all the promotional videos and still photography for that for years, but I always missed it. I just didn't have the gear. And then when I got the job, buy myself some good gear and bought a camera and started taking still photography for the department just for their promotional needs, just mostly in a hobby sense. I started doing still photography for the fire department. And then once I acquired some new camera gear, started doing promotional videos for them as well, mostly just in a hobby capacity, and ended up doing a video for the department that did really well. And then about a year ago, our chief asked me if I'd do a 5 to 7 minute video highlighting the services within our department and particularly our peer support team, basically an infomercial for our peer support team. And that isn't really my style. If you see any of my work or my projects, I put a lot of effort into them and kind of think of myself as the perfectionist in my own mind. Like I just beat something up until I can't beat it up anymore, and then I release it. So I decided I was just going to talk to some people. I didn't really know where to start and said, I'll see if anybody's willing to talk to me on camera, and reached out to a couple people, and eventually someone said yes. And then one person turned into two turned into four. And before I knew it, over 4 months, I interviewed about 10 people, all within my department. And some of the stories that I heard were really moving. It was hard not to relate to the stories that I heard. And I realized really quick that this wasn't going to be a 5 to 7 minute infomercial on our peer support team. And I reached out to my chief and I said, look, this isn't going to be the video that we're all used to seeing. This is really deep and it's dark and it's raw and it's real, but I think it's going to do some good. I luckily got the opportunity from the chief right then and there to just run with it. And he said, just do your thing, run with it. Let me know when it's done. And so I continued filming. I went on calls. I acquired footage from the news, from stringers, people that sell footage to the news in our community. And a lot of people stepped up and gave me a lot of footage that I needed to actually put together a story, and just tried to tell the story in their own words. I didn't want a narrator. I wanted a really good representation of what we see every day. And in particular, our department being overworked, having mandatory overtime, people are burning out. And I wanted to capture that as best I could. And I think we did it.
Oh, you definitely did it. I mean, like I said, I can't speak enough about it. You nailed it with this film. Let's go back to the beginning, though. You mentioned that your parents were in the fire service and that it was always there for you.
Yeah.
One of the things I know we talked about a week ago when we first sat down to have a conversation is you mentioned a fire that touched your family a little bit, and it was a big deal in Seattle, correct?
Yeah. It still is a big deal for those who remember it and went through.
I consider myself somewhat of a student. I study fires, especially fires that have fatalities, especially LODD. But I had to look this one up. So maybe you want to give a little background on this fire, and maybe this will bring some people's attention to it.
Sure. Yeah. It was January 5th, 1995, in just south of downtown in Seattle. They had a building go up, and it was a 2-story warehouse building. And when the initial companies arrived on scene and gave their size up, they didn't realize that it was they had a basement fire happening in the building. And 4 guys were in there when the floor collapsed, and 4 went down. 2 of them survived the fall and ended up running out of air. And that looked like 2 possibly died during. It opened up a big hole for my family. My dad that was his district. That was his building. And he was driver at the time on a engine company, and they were on an EMS call when this fire came in. So if anyone knew the layout of the building, it would have been it. So they initially heard the call go out. They were on their EMS call. And then once they cleared that call, they were able to respond to the fire. But at that point, it was already a little too late. And I was 7 years old when it happened. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was at my grandma's house. I was just about to walk upstairs to go to bed, and then breaking news on the TV: 4 firefighters were missing in a warehouse fire in Seattle. I knew both my folks were working that night, and both of them ended up being on the scene. And I went to bed not really knowing if they were alive. And then it did turn out to be 4 fatalities in the fire, and that opened up quite a criminal investigation. Did turn out to be an arson fire, and that building was actually being watched by the ATF due to arson threats to it. So they were already initially planning something or expecting something to happen with this building, but that information never got transferred to the field in Seattle. So basically, these firefighters were walking into a trap that they could have been warned about, but weren't. That brought up a lot of trauma within my parents, especially my dad. My dad held on to, I guess, some guilt from that, from not being able to respond initially, thinking he could have made a difference when you never know. But that kind of took my dad down a pretty dark path. He went pretty heavily into the alcohol, and he didn't last more than 6 years past that incident and ended up retiring early. My mom did a full 30 years, stepdad 32 years in it. And that wound was still felt today within my family. My dad doesn't really like to talk about it. But when I first started to really consider going after the fire service in my mid-20s, I didn't have a good relationship with my dad. And my folks, they divorced when I was 3. At the age of about 10, he was pretty much out of my life. And after I decided I wanted to go through it, I guess a conversation with myself, and I said, if I'm going to do this, I need to understand what went wrong with my dad. I needed to understand what he saw, how it affected him, because I don't want to set myself up for the same thing. And so 25 years old, I tried to go on a little mission to understand him better. And I talked to a lot of firefighters that worked with him and tried to ask him as much as I could, but he still wouldn't really give it up. It was eerie because I never really knew my dad like that. I kind of knew the alcoholic dad. I didn't know the fireman that was my father. And I wanted to understand what went wrong. And then the people that knew him best started laying out some of these calls that he'd been on, paying fire. He was first on scene at something called the Goldmark murders. It was on Christmas Eve in Seattle, or case of mistaken identity. It was supposed to be a political hit. Somebody broke into a family's home, bludgeoned the whole family with an iron. And he was first on scene for that. And kind of hearing how he handled this was eerie. Was told off, my mom would come home and he'd be shooting targets in the backyard of the guy who actually killed all those kids. He held on to that. He took it home and self-medicated how he would. And then our relationship fell apart fairly soon after that. I knew that if I was going to be a fireman, I wanted to understand what happened to him, because I didn't want the same thing to happen to myself. I didn't want to set myself up for failure. And it was crazy to hear some of these stories and people tell me, your dad was the best fireman I've ever seen in my life. And that was hard to really wrap my head around until I got on the job. And so I tested for about 5 years straight, and I got shut down by Seattle time and time again. And then I just realized, well, this just isn't going to happen for me. And I was still on some hiring lists, and then got into paramedics privately, and got about halfway through. And then I got the offer, went through, and almost initially after I got into the field, I started to see things that affected me that I would take home. And for me, it's always the family's reactions. Those are the moments that get me on calls to this day. When I see a mom shriek and wail, and I feel like you must not have a heart if that doesn't affect you a little bit.
Yeah, if it doesn't affect you at all, or if it doesn't affect you a little bit, yeah, you're almost heartless, because I remember calls like that, and I remember screams like that, and they stick with you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I understood a little bit more about my dad through that process. I think my whole journey in the fire service personally has been just searching for an understanding of my life's background and my family and where it went wrong. Because in some ways, I grew up in a broken home, even though both my folks were firefighters. They had good jobs. And my mom really did her best with me, but she was trying to raise a man that was rebellious. And I put her through a lot of grief growing up. But I think it all came to head for me when I got in. And then I started actually doing the job and understanding what was happening around me. It was quite the experience.
So you're 5 years into the fire service now.
Yes.
And you're firefighter paramedic, correct?
Yeah. So I got the offer, and I actually had to drop out of school to take the offer, and took it, got through, spent a couple years on a busy engine, and then went through my department's paramedic program, which took about 10 years. So I've been a medic now for about a year.
Okay. And then, like you say, your chief comes to you and says, hey, I need a 5 to 7 minute video. And you delve into it, and you find that there's no way in hell you can cover this topic in 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, I did. I knew that pretty quick. I was just trying to be tactful on how I was going to break the news to them. Because I don't like to, when people assign me things, I don't like to disappoint them. I like to, do everything I can to make it that much better if I can. And I knew we had something special after about 4 months in, and realized that, wow, I've never heard anybody talk about this kind of stuff to this extent and be this honest.
I have to imagine that you felt the same way I did when I had my first 5 interviews, and I was trying to bank a couple episodes, and I listened to these guys, or guys and gals actually, and I was blown away by the fact that they were willing to step up and put their story out there. But B, that some of the things they were going through and some of the feelings they were having, it comes home to you, and you realize we all are going through this stuff.
Yeah. It made me feel it didn't make me feel alone when I was listening to all these words. In fact, I felt encouraged. I felt, wow, there's a lot of us out there. Because I silently dealt with a lot of this stuff myself. I have a fiance. I have a mom, 30 years firefighter medic. I have people I can talk to, and I do talk to. But hearing that I wasn't alone within my own department was encouraging to me. And it also made it that much more important. It was, I had to tell myself, don't fuck this up.
Yeah, there's that pressure, right?
Yeah.
I found the same thing. My first 5 episodes were not all focused in my department, but once the word got out that I was doing this project or this podcast, it was a project at the time, and people in my own department just came out of the woodwork, and I quickly realized that I could do a show just on my department, and I might not run out of material.
Right.
I realized that I needed it to be a national project because everyone in the fire service is feeling this.
Right.
And so it's been this eye-opening thing of how similar yet different every story is.
Yes, absolutely. And I worked tirelessly on this thing. I killed myself over this project. I put probably 600 hours into it. I worked on it every single day in some way, shape, or form for about 8 months. And I was also going through my own shit during that time and trying to figure out a balance. And I think everything that I was dealing with, all the issues that I was having on the job, having those feelings that a lot of us have, I think I funneled it all into the project. Basically everything got put on hold, or all my aggression, anything I had to say basically got put into this documentary. All that energy funneled to. So then when it finished, I was hit pretty hard with the reality of, wow, I actually have to work out a lot of my own shit here. And that's where I'm at now. But
So
it was a life-changing experience. For sure.
again, that's another ironic similarity between us, because as I started working on this project myself, I started my own therapy.
Mhm.
And because I got to the point where I'm 10 years in basically, and I knew I wasn't handling these calls correctly. And I had my own personal life that was just in shambles. And I'm just coming out of that part of my life, and I'm still adding stuff from the job in whatever you want to call it, this picture that's in my head. And I knew I had to do something, because a couple of friends at work, a couple of coworkers would notice that something wasn't right, and then it got to the point where I just couldn't get through a shift without, at some point getting emotional about something. And it usually wasn't related to the job. It was just everything was just there, ready, primed to explode on me. And so that's when I finally said, yeah, I need some help. And so it's coincided with the show, and my own journey is running parallel to the show. And I pour a lot of my energy into the show outside of work as well. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because there's again, another similarity between the stories.
Yeah. And I'm sure you deal with this too. I didn't really know how to respond to a lot of people. A lot of people reach out, and I don't have any peer support training. I'm not a mental health counselor. I don't know shit in regard to that. So that's been overwhelming too. It's not that I don't have gratitude, or I'm not happy that people feel comfortable enough to come to me, but it's a lot. It's a lot when you don't have any training in that aspect. And it's a lot when suddenly everybody feels comfortable telling you how they feel.
Oh yeah, it is a lot. I can
Yeah.
verify that statement. It's a lot, because yeah, you put yourself out there, you make yourself available, and you have to after you do something like this.
Yeah, I don't know why in my mind I thought that I would be in the background making this whole thing. I didn't put myself in it. I think there might be like one tiny clip of me, and I didn't give any interviews. I really wanted to just be in the background for this. Now that it's done, it's now it's out there for the world to see. And we've been getting reached out to by people from all over the world, and it's great. It's enlightening, but it's overwhelming at times too. So I'm still trying to figure out that balance.
Yeah, my buddy who runs another podcast, and he gave me a lot of information about how to the equipment and setup. And he did say, when he listened to my show, when he listened to my idea, and he listened to a couple of the shows, the raw audio shows, his only reply to me was, "You better be ready." And I didn't understand what he meant. And now I'm starting to understand what he meant by "you better be ready." And I don't know if you or I could have ever been ready for the response that we've gotten.
I know I couldn't have been. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have been at all. And I worked on this thing for so long, and I'm so insecure about my own work. So by the time it came down to actually show it to our command staff in the department, I said, look, I think I'm ready to show you what I have, because I put so much time, energy, and effort into it that at that point I'd become attached to it. It'd become a piece of art that I'm working on. And I didn't want to get too much further into it without them seeing it, because I was afraid, what are they going to say when they see it? Oh, you got to cut this out. You got to change that. We can't put that in. And I just kept it the way it was. And I said, look, when it got done, I went to the front of the room and I said, I slammed down my pen and paper. And I said, all right, questions, thoughts, concerns. What do you want me to change? And the room was just silent. And I didn't understand why. I was like, oh, great. And I said, what do you want me to change, Chief? And he said, I don't want you to change a damn thing. And that was pretty interesting to me. I'm sure many people can relate. The fire service likes to keep everything close to the chest as far as what they put out there to the world. And it's all about image, and the image is wrong, and you're going to hear it from the department. And I didn't hear any.
From what I saw in the movie, and the interview that was done, the interview parts that were done with your fire chief, I admired that guy immensely.
Yeah.
From what I gathered from those parts, he gets it.
He definitely gets it.
And so it's so fresh to hear a fire chief at that point just get it. And so I was very impressed with what he had to say, and how he handled the interviews.
Well, I'm still blown away by it, by the support that he's offered, the encouragement that he's shown. He's a fireman's chief. It really is. And
Not a term we throw around, so that's nice to hear.
yeah, no, and the funniest part was he changed a lot of minds when he came on. You know how it comes when somebody gets brought up to be a chief in a department. Somebody somewhere is going to have something to say about it, how they think it's going to go. And I think he surprised all of us. And I'm certainly encouraged by how supportive he's been and how he's taken this issue to the forefront. This is an actual priority for him and the future of our department. And I think it's changed a lot of minds, and it's encouraged a lot of people to get help that have been struggling. And he knows it's an issue and that needs to be talked about. And for me, that's more than encouraging. So I couldn't be more proud of my chief and thankful for everything he's done in regards to this project and everything else. We lucked out there.
Yeah, and you have me jealous. We're in the process of looking for a new fire chief right now, and man, if we could find that needle in the haystack that you guys did, that would be just phenomenal for us. And that's going to be a tough search, but that is definitely something that a new fire chief at any department should emulate.
Oh yeah. He's got his work cut out for him. It's an uphill battle. We're infamously known in this region for coming up short on our budgets and having to get more back to the city to meet those budget requirements. And it's tough because we need every dollar we can get right now. So we're hoping the film can also show some of these politicians and people in charge of our city and our community that like, this is a problem, that we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and we're just trying to play catch up. It's just not enough support financially for the fire department these days in our region.
Let's talk about the film a little bit. And I don't want to give too much away because I want my people, my audience to watch the film. And I think that it would be impactful if they didn't know people's stories from the film, even though we could talk for hours on the stories that are in the film. I think that can be left for somebody to watch the film to learn these stories and to learn from those stories. I think that what I'd like to do is just hit on some topics that we have that are similar on the podcast and in the movie. And I think we'll start right where you did. I mean, we're talking about overtaxing or firefight. We're doing more with less or more with the same amount if we're lucky. And I know from my department, we just recently switched from a 24/48 schedule with a Kelly to the 56 we're doing a day on, day off, day on, day off, day on, 4 off. And it's just a special kind of tired when you get to that point. And so now we're losing people. We're losing ALS providers, and we've gone to a 1-on-1 model, which is increased runs for every unit. And some of our guys actually took a pay cut to come to that schedule because that's the way it worked out. And unfortunately, it was these young guys who have 5 years or less on the job. And
Right.
I can't help but encourage these people. If the grass is greener somewhere, you've got to go for it. And then that also handcuffs us even more. And that's what you guys aren't seeing the same set of problems, but it's a very similar set of problems where you're doing more with less, correct?
Correct. Yes. We haven't added a response unit, a primary response unit in years, and our population's been increasing. Our call volume's gone up. Our homeless population's tripled. We're in some hurting times, right? So I didn't want that environment to be looked over in the film. I needed to spell that out, that this is a contributing factor to people's mental health right now. I really wanted that environment to be captured because it's unavoidable. Those are circumstances that have contributed to people's mental health today. And I think we did a good job of not beating that up in the film. We definitely talk about it, but we wanted to talk about everything. And I wanted to keep the film under an hour if possible, and I'm just over.
Yeah, you're just right there.
Yeah. And it got to the point where I wanted to cut stuff out, and they were like, you can't cut anything out. Like, you just can't. You need to add. I didn't want to add. There was a happy medium there.
And you cover it well because you mentioned the increases in violent crimes. You mentioned the increases in just general run. Some of your guests that I call them guests that are in the movie discuss it themselves, how they're just running more with less. And the one that really stood out to me for your area was that increase in arson crime.
Yeah, scary.
Was it 82%, I believe?
82% was when I took that part of the news article out. I believe it's gone up since then. And our homicide rate has increased by 200% in the region. That number just came out today.
200% increase in homicide. And you guys are seeing most of those calls.
Yes. And that's homicide. That's not people shot.
Right.
We have shootings almost every day. And I think fire departments all over the region and really all over the country are probably feeling the fallout over the defund the police movement. We're certainly feeling it up here, where basically some laws have been passed in our region that have handcuffed police and not let them respond to the calls that they want to go on. We have an increased heightened awareness for our region right now because we know that we're alone. We don't have the support from the police that we once had. Police are understaffed. We're understaffed. It's a kind of demoralizing environment in fire departments all over the country, right? As a result of, politics and certain laws that have been passed that we're certainly feeling in this region. It's unavoidable. It needs to be talked about.
The other thing that, of course, the other similarities were the stigmas that we have, why we're not asking for help. And I think that it's the same thing across the board that I'm finding on this show. We're the helpers. We don't ask for help. That's one of the themes that you heard over and over in your movie.
Everybody comes into the fire service like they have something to prove, and most of us do. But at what point do you just admit the things that you see around you bother? And to never admit that, then I think you're setting yourself up for failure, because it's going to affect you, and it's going to affect people around you. And people get burned out. People get to a point where they've seen too much. And that stigma is still alive and well today. And I think it's gotten better, but there's just things that are still not talked about in the fire department, this being one of them. And though we're seeing an increase in people finally actually, for one, acknowledging that there is an issue, that people are killing themselves, that this is an underutilized resource available to firefighters. I think that we can only avoid this for so long.
You mentioned the stigma, and I had a guest tell me one time that he didn't think the stigma was external. He thought the stigma was more internal. What do you think about something like that kind of thought?
I'm guilty of it myself. I've been on calls that really bothered me, but I wanted to hold it together for other people, or at least in my mind, thinking that's helping, being the strong person that people can lean on. Even the strong persons can break. It's just a matter of time. So for me, it was more of a passive mechanism. It was just something that I didn't realize that I was doing. It wasn't a conscious thought of, oh, be strong, act like this doesn't bother you. That wasn't what was happening. It was more passive. And I think a lot of people, that's where they live. They live in this stigma that exists that they don't even really know is happening, or behaviors they exhibit that they don't even realize they're doing. I'm still trying to understand the stigma, to be honest with you. I know the old school stigma, it's very active. It's not passive. No, we don't talk about this. Man the fuck up. This is what we do. And you can say that as much as we want, but the bottom line is what we see is not normal. The events that we go through and the stress levels, the lack of sleep, all of that is not normal. And it's completely okay to acknowledge that. So that's how I feel about the stigma, at least.
So it's okay to acknowledge that things aren't normal. How are you doing that for yourself on a day-to-day or shift-by-shift basis?
I've known it's not normal for a long time. When I think I was 3 months in as a probie, and went on a call where we worked an overdose, and mom came in and realized what was happening and just watched her reaction. And then it was just like family member after family member. They just kept showing up. We're right in the middle of a pretty dynamic code. And before you know it, you haven't even processed like them processing it. You're working, you're in a stressful environment, and people all around you it's hitting them, their process as it's happening. You don't really get that opportunity until after you leave. And I went home that day, and that next morning, and I felt like shit. I felt really bad for this family. And I now realize that's what triggers me, having empathy and putting yourself in not just your patient's shoes, but your patient's family's shoes, and going, man, if my son was dead on the floor right now and 8 people are pumping on his chest and trying to wake him up, that destroy me. So for me, it's a battle of not taking it too personally. I try not to hold on to the blame or the guilt or asking the questions why, where most of us are never going to know why, which is a problem for me. It's been a personal issue for me my whole life, because I search for the answer to what I want to know, what led to it and what got people to that point. And sometimes you're just never going to get the answer to that question. That can be discouraging. But for myself, especially after working on this film, I had a stigma within myself. I was afraid to ask for help after putting this out there, and then having people watch it said, "Oh, you did such a great job. It's going to change things." And I still feel the same, but I was battling my own demons and going through my own stuff right at the end of this film. And then I felt a responsibility to stand up and say, I'm not going to get help, because how would that look? You just made this film about all these people that told you about how they got time off, and now you're getting time off. And then I had to wake myself up, and then my fiance recognized it early and said, it's okay to not be okay. And maybe I should take my own advice in this film. And I ended up having to make that decision and put that, I don't even know what to call it, stigma or pride aside, to get myself some help and not really worry about what people think. If you're not doing okay, you're not doing okay. It doesn't matter if you just made a film about mental health and PTSD. If I'm not doing good, I'm not doing good.
The other thing that I thought you did a good job on, and this is the one thing that I've been talking about quite a bit, is the suicides.
Right.
I don't think the general public realizes the number of firefighters that are killing themselves on a yearly basis. And the stat you used in the movie was, I'm not sure how many years, was it 10 years?
What's that?
The statistic on the number of firefighters. I think it was, I thought it was over a 10-year period roughly that you used in the movie.
Yes. Yeah. 20, I think. It started at 2001. And I got these numbers from Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance. And even they admit that, we don't have the full picture, because a lot of these suicides are not reported.
No, I'm a firm believer that the majority of the suicides for firefighters aren't reported, and discussed it on a couple of episodes. And I'm not sure the reason why. I don't know if it goes back to an embarrassment, or if it goes back to a monetary base.
And if you don't ask the questions, you don't really know. It's really a bummer that we can't figure out a better way to track these things, because they're happening. It's real.
It's very real.
Yeah. And I think the first step is just acknowledging that it's happening, and it's a problem.
That's exactly what I've been saying, not just on the show, but to people. And I don't know, I know you've listened to a couple of episodes. I don't know if you knew the genesis for why I started this show.
Not really.
We had, I Instagram page just to kind of highlight issues within the department. It ran out of control for a little bit. And so I came around to a focus. We had a period of times where we had a number of suicides in what we call the DMV, the DC metro area. So DC, Maryland, Virginia. One day, a guy from a kind of a local adjoining, is a volunteer fire company, but he was a volunteer fireman a couple of years ago, but he killed himself. And that turned out to be number 5 in our area for a year.
Wow.
And so it was between volunteering career, and it ran from rookie to tenured firefighter. And those were the 5 that were reported in a year. I every time I see something that says firefighter X died unexpectedly, I almost assume that was suicide.
Right. So do I.
And so at that point, I decided these guys can't die in vain. Something good has to come from these deaths. And that's why I started pondering, all right, what can I do? And that's what turned into this podcast. So when you talked about suicide in the film, that does strike home with me, because that's the basis for why I decided to do this podcast. Wow. And then you have a couple of your guests in the film discuss their experiences or attempts at suicide. And again, I'm not going to get into specifics because I want my audience to watch your film, but it's very real, and it's very real across the country.
Yeah. You've done a really tremendous thing with this podcast. And yeah, from the bottom of my heart, when I first heard it, I was like, wow, I really wish I could listen to this sooner. And a couple of your episodes talked about relationships and working with their wives, and how their wives would notice things, and just a lot of it, all of it talked to me. So I'm glad we met that thing. And I think you're doing a really good thing.
Where do you see the future of mental health in the fire service? I think I have some ideas, but I like to bring that topic up with people when I talk to them, because
sure,
I think there's some value in discussing the future, obviously, because we want to know where we're going. What would you like to see change in general in the fire service when it comes to mental health?
A lot. I want to see a lot change, honestly. And I think it starts with workers' compensation. Yes, in our region, we have something set up with our state to where you can claim PTSD as an on-the-job injury. However, the process of getting that approved needs reform, and it needs reform bad. And the other thing is, for some of the stuff that we're battling right now is, yeah, I can go see a psychologist, but they have to be affiliated with my insurance company, or L&I won't fork out any money for it. The problem is we might have 7 providers in our region that are booked up months ahead of time. That's not good enough. You need someone, you need them right now. And I want to see that change. I want some reform to the process of OJI within our state.
Let's talk about that real quick and it's not real quick because I have questions about that. The OJI, and that's on the job injury, correct?
Correct.
So you guys have a system set up where if there's a trauma or if there's PTS, that can be deemed an on the job injury. Am I right?
It can, yes. But we all, I think, within the fire service understand that a lot of that's cumulative. It's not just one incident. It's a combination of several.
I think it's almost never a solo incident.
And the way it's set up right now, they want a specific incident. So really, if you're out on the lines and things bother you, and write down these call numbers, actually keep track of this stuff. This is exposures, and you need to treat it as such. Because if you don't, and you get into a point where you've had enough and you need to actually claim this injury, they're going to want a specific incident. And that doesn't always work. My recommendation to people is get ahead of it, document this stuff, and just, whether it's a note on your phone, something, but have some kind of documentation to back up the fact that you were even on this call that bothered you. Because it might come down to you proving that you were not only there, but that it was a traumatic event, that it bothered you. I wish it wasn't as hard as it is, but
it's funny, ironic. You say you wish it wasn't as hard as it is, but at least you have the option where you are to find a call and maybe have a case for an on-the-job injury. That's a foreign language where I am.
That's crazy. And that's crazy. And I don't want to take anything we have for granted, because I've only been in the fire service for 5 years. I don't have 20 years on the job, and I haven't worked all over the country. I've only had the exposure to my limited amount of experience that I have.
It's the same here. And that's exactly why I'm blown away by the fact that when I heard that in the movie, I was like, oh my God, they can actually do that. And I've made this
state level,
but I've made this argument even at the local level with battalion chiefs or captains or whatever, that if you get a traumatic call, and we all know what a traumatic call is. Yes, I will stand by the fact that any call can be traumatic. It's how it affects you personally. Those marked calls, the infant CPR, the fatal fires, the LODD, whatever it is, one of those that would really knock anybody on their ass. I've made the argument that's an injury, and that they should be put on injury leave and given whatever resources they need to start that recovery process.
Absolutely. But I think the best thing on your side is numbers. How many people are actually taking off time? How many people are going out sick? And you don't have a good system to report that because they're not acknowledging that it exists.
No. And when I make that suggestion, I'm laughed at, or we're laughed at, because it's, that'll never happen. They don't even bother to entertain the idea. And I think that when I say where we might want to see the fire service go with mental health, I think what you guys have out there, and we can make that we can filter that down from the state level to the local level, and we can start to determine that these are injuries, and we can do something about it. We can give some time off. We can get coverage at least for the rest of the shift or whatever it is. That's I think the starting point.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel terrible that there's other regions like yours in particular that don't recognize this stuff is happening, because that's your biggest hurdle. And I'm glad that we've made progress in that aspect. Now it's just fine tuning things. Yeah. I feel really terrible for people that can't claim what's actually happening.
How successful are your firefighters in getting that classified as an on-the-job injury?
Right now, it seems to be kind of 50-50. If you don't keep track of a specific call, everything like keeping those records can bite you in the ass. I know that firsthand. Like I said, the other issue is the affiliated providers. Like I said, if you have a provider that has a license and practices mental health, and you go see them, but your insurance or L&I or workers' compensation won't recognize them because they're not in their network of, people that take your insurance, and then just, you can't see them, or we're not going to compensate you for anything that you spent there. That's a problem. You either need to increase your amount of providers in our region, or you need to have some kind of exception to that rule, because otherwise you're just going to turn people off from getting help. They don't take my insurance. Fuck it. I'm just going to keep working until I can't anymore.
Yeah, because $150 a pop for a therapy session that hurts your pocket.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No matter who you are,
No.
and that all increases, and it stacks up over time very quickly. Before you know it, you're out thousands.
I had a discussion with Robbie. He's in Tennessee now, but by way of California originally, and he applied for short-term disability for PTS and was denied, even though the doctor had documented everything and had diagnosed him with PTS. The insurance company said, no, you don't qualify, and they didn't give him a short-term disability. But when he came back to the same insurance company later that year to renew his life insurance because he had another child and he wanted to add money to his life insurance, they denied it based on his PTS diagnosis.
So they're basically expecting him to kill himself so they won't give him a life insurance policy.
Yeah.
And but it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And so that was just such a slap in the face to him and to anybody that's gone through that.
Well, especially if you read between the lines, you're like,
right,
what does this statement actually say?
It'll be cheaper if you kill yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
And that's an insurance thing. I know it's not a department thing, but it's still part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrible. I think exposure to people outside of our profession is paramount. I'm hoping to get some of that happening with this film, get people actually some eyes on what's actually happening. So that's all I hope for. And as far as where I see it going in our department and in our region, I'd like to see technology utilized a little better. During COVID, we couldn't even enter our stations without taking our temperature, picking up the iPad and saying, yes, I don't have a fever. Or I have not been around anyone with COVID. And we had to do that to enter the field.
Oh yeah. So did we. Yeah.
Yeah. So how hard would it be to just maybe add a checkbox of a mental health check when you come in? Something that's not that active. It's just a checkbox that you check that, yeah, I would like some resources. If you have a peer support team member a specific individual, you'd have that option to check their name. Utilize this technology a little better in that aspect. I think is going to help us. That's something I'd also like to see.
Yeah, that I like that idea. The issue I see with that is going back to how honest are we going to be with each other at that point. And I guess if you get to that, if you're at that point where you really want some help, you're going to be honest. But both you and I know that if you're not ready for it, you're not going to say it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to a point where I couldn't really fight it anymore.
Same here.
My fiance was saying, look, you're not yourself. I mean, it's not stuff anybody wants to hear, but you need to hear it, especially if it's gotten to that point. I'm thankful I have an opportunity to get some help, work on myself, try to make it out of this thing alive. Because really, that's what we're all after. We love the fire service and we put our whole lives into this, but there's a life after you leave.
I think I forget who said it in the film, but I'll paraphrase because my memory is shot sometimes. But last night listening, at one point, paraphrasing, the comment was made, this is a fantastic job. It's a great job, but it is killing us.
Right.
And
yeah,
I don't think enough firefighters realize that, let alone people outside the fire service realize what all is affecting us in this job. From actual fire to the traumas to our gear, everything, to the sleep. We haven't even talked about sleep and nutrition and all that stuff that adds into it. So everything is geared to kill us, essentially. And that's part of the job, but there's some things that can be taken into account and can be mitigated if a department can be proactive. Or if
I'm very proud of my department.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting to, that listening to your fire chief, listening to the guys that are sharing their story, listening to your mental health specialist. I forgot her name. I apologize.
Dr. Jenny Gregory.
And she calls herself a traumatologist, or is that what, or something to that effect? I forgot.
She's a traumatologist.
Traumatologist, which I'd never heard that phrase before, that name before. So that was interesting to hear it phrased that way. What she's doing for you guys and with you guys is fantastic. It's some wonderful work.
Oh yeah, she's been a breath of fresh air for us. I'm sure you probably know what I'm talking about. Is one of the hardest things when going to see a counselor is laying the scene. explaining your job. They really haven't put any time or effort into learning what we do and what we see. That's probably not the good counselor for you. So for me, it's a relief when you go into a room and you're like, I don't have to tell you what I do. You know what I do. I don't have to explain to you what I saw and correlate that back with how it bothers me. You already understand that. So having her, and she's seen a lot of shit. She's been all over the world. There are all sorts of different war zones.
In the movie, she was just going to the Ukraine, correct?
Yeah. She went to the Ukraine in the middle of filming for that. And it's just dozens and dozens of war-torn places in the world. And she's got stories for days of traumatic stuff that she herself has seen. So not having to, like I said, lay that seed for her was beneficial to us, and especially to me personally. And she's done a lot of good for our department in that aspect, and trying to change things and getting people trained and increasing our resource list too. That's a big thing. That just needs to happen. And luckily, people have reached out all over the region after seeing the film that are providers that do have services that we can benefit, and I just pass them along to our safety chief and hopefully add them into our list. And so that's been awesome to see as well.
All right, so I want people to watch the film. I'm going to direct everybody to the film as much as obviously link to it in the show notes so they have a connection to make it as easy as possible. I'll put it out on Instagram, and whatever following I have there can get a hold of. So I want to end with those two questions that I ask everybody. The first one being an everyday carry based on what we both call the title of our projects. So mine being the things we all carry. I'd like to ask everybody about an everyday carry, something you carry on your person that you feel naked without.
That's a tough one. I was thinking about that one.
Yeah, I gave you a week. Heads up on this one.
Yeah. Oh gosh, can you give me a second?
Of course. We can edit out all the dead air.
Good, cool. Because I'm looking for this book first. So I have this set aside. Something that God damn it. I thought about this and I just couldn't get an answer. Can you give me an example? I'm hoping this is not.
For me, it used to be, have you ever heard of the Skulls for Hope? He was one of my earliest guests, and he makes these bracelets, and they're beaded bracelets, and there's a skull on each one of them, and it's just a suicidal awareness and prevention thing that he does, because he went through some dark times for himself after a call that really affected him. And so I wear a Skulls for Hope bracelet on my right arm, and that's every day. So that's been an everyday carry for me. And then once I started my own therapy, at the end of each session, we do some acupuncture, and she just puts 5 needles in each ear for me. And it's, for me, it just brings a meditation. And so I sit there for about 15, 20, 30 minutes, and I just meditate with these needles in my ear. But then she also puts these, what she calls peas, and I mistakenly called them beans the other day, but she puts these peas in a strategic spot in the back of my ear, and so they stay there between therapy appointments. And so I've been using that as my everyday carry because I feel naked when those come off now. Those are my examples. I can't waste any more time for you now.
All right. I'd have to say my everyday carry is probably just my challenge coin that was given to me after I, graduated Recruit Academy from some instructors that still mean a lot to become some really good friends of mine. And on the challenge coin is one of our LODDs who passed away on a call in 2013. And he was larger than life kind of individual. And then I never met this guy. Looking into some of the stuff that he did, sailing around the world, being to all these different countries, backpacking, really actually inserting himself into history all throughout the world. It's been a source of inspiration to me. So I carry his coin. I have tons of different challenge coins, and I'm not really a challenge coin flipper, if you will.
Right.
But that one's special to me just because it does have his face on it, and it's just a reminder to just go above and beyond. So that's something I carry with me every day.
And for the non-firefighters in the audience, a challenge coin is just that. It's a coin that you're given for some sort of an accomplishment normally. And there's a tradition, if you're out at a bar and someone slams down a challenge coin on the bar and you don't have one, then you're buying the next round is essentially the challenge.
Yeah.
So just so everybody has a frame of reference, what that tradition is. And I think that's a perfect one to have.
Right.
So what about a book? What's a book you want to suggest?
So a book that's really stood out to me lately was actually recommended to me by my fiance, and it's called Inner Child Therapy: How to Deal with Your Inner Child by Maureen Jones. And it's a short book. It's actually only, I think, like 26 minutes on Audible, but really highlights a lot of stuff. For me, all my trauma doesn't just come from the job. I have a lot of family history. I'm sure you do too. I'm sure everybody does. PTSD is an accumulated thing. And for me, a lot of things stemmed from my childhood and, growing up, and things I dealt with that I thought I dealt with that maybe I didn't. And here I am 34. And now I have to deal with them. So that book really broke it down for me to understand your past trauma and your upbringing and things that all weave into the fabric of who you are today. So I found that book to be beneficial. I listen to it often.
Awesome. I will link that in the show notes. If there's any way, actually, if you could send me a picture of the challenge coin, I can put that in there as well so people can get a glimpse of that.
I'd love to.
One thing I forgot to ask you, what are your future plans? Any more films in the works?
Yeah. So I'm definitely taking a break, much needed break. Like I said, this thing really took the life out of me. And then I was putting all my aggression into finishing it, and it became an obsession. And once that's done and taken away from you, you have to reset. And so right now I'm taking a nice break. I'm going to go back and doing some still photography that I'm excited about doing, because it's my little comfort zone. It doesn't take a ton of effort for me, and I get excited when I do it. I do have plans to pursue some more document films. I eventually, one day, I think I'd like to do something on the Pang Fire. And just because the story is just insane, even the events after the fire. And it's a forgotten tale in our region, unfortunately.
No, like I said, I had to look it up. I had never heard of it.
Yeah. And there was so much involved in that, and the arson, and they knew who did it, and they had to track him down from Brazil. The White House got involved. It's a really dynamic crime story as well. So I think I might end up pursuing that someday. I would also like to maybe do a video about police. Definitely ideas in the hopper.
And rest is good. Taking that breather and taking that break and recentering yourself is optimal, especially after something that intensive.
Yeah, and that's what I'm focused on right now. Yes, I have plans for the future. I don't know exactly what they are, but right now it's just enjoy family, try to recenter a little bit, and get back on track, because I definitely don't feel on track right now. This has been quite the whirlwind of emotions making this thing.
Yeah, and you're doing this show, but you're doing press constantly, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's been really difficult. I'm pretty uncomfortable in front of a camera anyway. This is different, though. This is more personal. This is just a conversation. And so that was why I was anxious to do something like this. You don't get to see the actual real side of the human element, I feel like, in a lot of the press.
No, you don't. No, it's the nuts and bolts and the why should we watch?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate the film, and I appreciate that the mission and the message from the film. We're right there together, and we're doing the same. We were doing the same thing. And if anytime you want to come on, and you want to talk about it, or you want to send somebody my way, feel free, because I love what you did there, man. I love what you did.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. And I love what you're doing. I really do. One of my new favorite podcasts, for sure.
I appreciate that. And like I said, I'm going to try to direct this audience of mine towards your film, and I'll put it out there as much as possible.
All right. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate everything.
All right. Well, go enjoy the rest of your day, sir. I will talk to you in the future at some point.
Sounds great.
All right, man. Take care.
Take care.
We're out.
All right, sweet.
That was a good talk, man. I appreciate it.
Good. It was.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Things We All Carry. Head over to the website, thethingsweallcarry.com, for show notes, resources, and to sign up for the newsletter. Until next week, take care of yourself, and remember to check in on each other.